Hello, Garland Nixon here, and this Ukraine Neocon project has created some dynamics that I think the neocons didn't quite anticipate. Let's talk. Hello, Garland here, and I'm sure you all know I haven't been on the air a lot lately. I traveled for a bit and I had a lot going on, so I'm back, and let's get things flowing again. And it's going to be a good weekend. Going to be lots of videos and lots of great stuff to talk about. All right. So let's start with this. Something that popped into my mind before we really get going, and I guess this is part of this discussion, and that was I'm watching the Duran, and they had this guy. I believe he was an Indian former diplomat or something, really good. I don't miss anything. First of all, everything that Duran puts out, I'm gonna watch. I don't miss anything. I really enjoy Alexander Mercouris's you know uh, um opinions, and very knowledgeable, very very learned guy. And so I'm watching. And so, needless to say, if it's on, I'm going to watch it. And but what was interesting, I felt that the guy missed the mark in his discussion about, and a lot of people do, in his discussion about a potential negotiated end to Ukraine. A lot of people missed the mark, and I felt like this guy missed the mark, and here's why. It's easy to discuss that if you discuss it from the perspective of all parties being honest actors, right? If you discuss it as this is a conflict between Russia and Ukraine. Clearly, the U.S. is involved, but you don't really get into it in depth how they're involved. Then you're going to have one conversation. If you really get into the philosophical um, aspects of the US neocon perspective and what the Ukraine project really was and what they're really attempting to do, it's a totally different conversation. So when the guy that was there was talking, and I don't blame him, I mean, a lot of people have this discussion about a negotiated end. They discussed it from the perspective of a negotiated end in a way that would address the security dynamics in Eastern Europe, the security dynamics of the Europeans, what the Russians were. But okay, great, that's all good and fine. However, here's the problem: you can't have a discussion of a of a negotiated end to this conflict without first acknowledging that there are only two parties involved here, and that's the United States and Russia, for all intents and purposes. For from the perspective of what's, boiling this down, there are two parties involved here. It is that those are the neocons, right? The DC neocons and the Russians. The DC neocons being the people who deliberately instigated this war. So you can't talk about this conflict and ending the conflict without addressing what started the conflict. And what started the conflict is the expansion of NATO. But that ain't it. That still ain't it. Because then you have to talk about why is NATO expanding, and you go back around to the same thing. What is it the neocons want, and how can you get a negotiated end? Well, that's why I put Russia, China, Ukraine, right? Neocon disaster. In order for this part of the neocon plan to be effective, certain things has to happen. Number one, Russia has to fall and lose and be torn apart. You see, the plan here is not about Russia. So when the guy was talking about a discussion of Russia and the U.S. or Russia and the EU, you must first understand that that Ukraine and the EU are sacrificial. They're cannon fodder. That's their job. The European Union, Ukraine are cannon fodder for the neocons in DC. They are to be sacrificed for a greater ideological cause. The greater ideological cause is to maintain U.S. world hegemony, which is already gone, to stop a multipolar world. Now, the gentleman was talking about a multipolar world, right? He would discuss the issue of a multipolar world, but he still kind of discussed a negotiated end to the war without tying those two together, without saying, look, in order for the neocons to be comfortable getting out of this thing, Russia has to, this is a grand plan, and a big grand part of their grand plan is Russia falls and Russia becomes absorbed by the DC neocon monster, and then they got all of Russia's stuff. And they've already done part of what they wanted, because part of what they wanted was they saw Russia, China, Europe as emerging military and or economic powers. And they said, all three of them must be taken down. Now, they've had success with the EU. They've brought the EU to heel, and the EU is in their place. And the EU completely is under the control of the US. The US has to buy, EU has to buy their gas and things like that from the EU. So the EU's done. And the EU's going even further now. They're just completely doing away with the EU. That's done. There's right now, I don't see a way out for the EU. They've dug themselves a hole that I don't see how they get out of this one for a number of reasons. So the EU, I think, is economic wasteland. That's what's coming for the EU. So the US has been successful mainly because the EU leaders are on board with it. It's not like they don't know what's going on. It's not like suddenly they woke up and they're like, hey, I may be wrong, but I think they're trying to screw us over. No, they're part of the plan. It's, look, we're going to screw over the people of the EU. And the EU leaders are like, well, all you had to say was, what do you want us to do to accomplish that? That's all they need. The Bear Box and the whoever Schultz is and the Sunaks, their job is neocons in DC. What do you want to accomplish? So we want to screw over your people and impoverish them. What is our part of the plan? What is our job? We'll do it. So the EU is the easy one. But in order to end this thing, see that it's disaster for the neocons, because the neocons plan, it's obvious. It's the same plan with everybody. It's the same plan with Iran. It's the same plan with China. It's the same plan with Russia. Surround them in bases, choke them out militarily, intimidate them, intimidate anybody else from doing business with them, use your economic power to economically wipe them out and destroy them with sanctions. Eventually their government falls and you can come in and take it. It's just simply, medieval siege. It's laying an economic / military siege to countries in a more updated way, so that you can justify it to your citizens, and it doesn't look quite so bad. It's just going out and murdering people, doing the same thing. That was their plan. The problem is that the Russians and the Chinese can see it. So what they have now is this. In order to, I put it like this, people who are talking about a negotiated end are talking about it in a theoretical world where the U.S. is not a malicious actor, right? The U.S. is just another country. If the U.S. was just another country, it would be easy. They could just negotiate a deal and end this thing. But the U.S. isn't just another country. The U.S. is a malicious actor. So the U.S.'s plan was get the war started. See, first of all, when you negotiated into the war, you have to understand the reality that the U.S. started the war and wants to keep it going, deliberately and intentionally started this war. They came in, they overthrew the country of Ukraine, right? They inserted, and empowered a Nazi government, and they started pumping weaponry into the country and building this military. So they built this thing to fight Russia. Now this thing is fighting Russia. The idea that the neocons in DC would want to discuss how to stop this monster, this Frankenstein monster they built from fighting Russia, is preposterous. And if you say, well, the monster's getting wiped out, it's getting destroyed, that's what they built it for. So from the neocons perspective, when you say, recently people have said, they're going to wipe out an entire generations of Ukrainians are being wiped out. And if they do this foolish spring offensive, generations will be wiped out in days. And from someone who has feelings toward my fellow humans, that would be a problem for me. For the neocons, their perspective is, yeah, we know that. That's what we built this thing for. We built this thing to crash, right? We built this. It's like back in the day, they used to have these car wreck derby things, and they bring these cars in, and the jobs was to crash together, right? That's what they built the Ukraine military for. They built it to use it, and to use it against the Russians. And so what? They don't care how many, if not all of them, get wiped out. They'll reach for the Poles next. That's what they're doing now. They're reaching for the Poles to throw them into the meat grinder. They don't care. So to have a discussion at all about ending the war through negotiations does not take into account that one side, think about this, the Russians are fighting the war, and this makes sense too. On the other side, the people who armed the Ukrainians, who instigated the war, but really aren't fighting it, right? They're not taking the losses here. They're not losing the people. They're just spending money, and that they're happy with that because that allows them to do what they do, which is lots of graft and corruption. So they're sitting back here in an armchair, man. They don't want to end this thing. So these people are talking about how do we get a negotiated end? Certainly not by talking to one side, the Americans. They don't want to end it. They started it. So what? Lots of losses. That's what they built the Ukrainian military for. They're sociopaths. They don't give a crap about Ukrainian lives. Wipe them all out as far as they're concerned. So you can't have a discussion with these people. So there is no discussion about a negotiated end, unless something that wouldn't happen. What would happen would be the Europeans would have to say, we've recognized that our security needs do not align with America's security needs, and we'd like to negotiate a settlement. Well, that's the end of NATO, and if there's European leaders that say that, that may be the end of them, because it wouldn't shock me if the CIA wouldn't kill them. If they pushed it too hard, the U.S. First of all, the U.S. killed JFK. They killed their own president. They killed RFK, a guy that was running for president. They killed Malcolm X and Martin Luther King. Name after name after name, I can tell you. Anybody that the U.S. empire felt threatened by internally, it killed them. You think they would hesitate to kill a couple of European leaders? And these people are they're criminals. They're thugs. They're organized crime. So Macron better watch his back. Macron ain't saying much, but he's saying enough to get his head blown off by these mutts. They'll do it. So there's no place in the neocon. Okay, if my plan is to come over your house and to kill everybody in your house and to eat them, what would be a plan for negotiated settlement of that? The only thing I want to do is eat everybody. I'm a werewolf, as it were. And my plan is when I come in the door, everybody gets eaten. How do you negotiate a settlement with a werewolf? What are they going to say? Okay, well, let's make a deal, right? Any deal that involves me eating you, that's a deal I can work with. If it doesn't involve me eating you, then I'm not signing off on that. Well, from your perspective, the only deal you could take is one in which you don't get eaten. So you can't get a very good bargain with a werewolf, can you? That's what you're looking at. Any deal. The neocons' plan is to wipe out Russia, and of course, to wipe out Russia, to wipe out the EU, and then to go after China next. Any deal that you put before the neocons that doesn't involve those three elements, hey, we want a deal in Ukraine. All righty. And what does it involve? Does it involve the total destruction of Russia? No. The destruction of the EU? No, actually, they're going to start getting along again. How about wiping out China? Now, then we ain't in. Yeah, but what about peace? If we wanted peace, we wouldn't have started this damn war in the first place. The last thing we're interested in peace. We're neocons. Perhaps you haven't read up on us. Perhaps you should. But bottom line is, so the neocons, they started the war, they're down with it. So when I hear these diplomats, no matter how brilliant these people are and how knowledgeable they are, talking about a negotiated settlement between Russia and the people whose plan is to break down, break apart, balkanize, destroy Russia and steal all of its stuff and impoverish its citizens. Yeah, I don't see a whole lot of, daylight available for that discussion. And I'm sure if you understand this, I'm telling the truth. Okay. So the neocons plan, right? Do that, take out Russia, blah, 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 and then go after China, right? But now they're at but I say this is their worst possible nightmare. And it's not like neocons have a long-term great plan that's going to work. They're playing. They're idiot ideologues. So their plan, it goes from last night till tomorrow. What happened this morning? Such and such happened. Let's do this. They don't really have long-term plans. But let's look at kind of what we're looking at here. Here's an example where we are. All righty. Now we can look. Putin meets with Chinese defense minister. Russian President Vladimir Putin has personally greeted China's state counselor and defense minister Li Shangfu at the Kremlin on Sunday. The defense chief, who happens to be under Russia-linked sanctions, U.S. sanctions, arrived in Moscow for a 3-day visit. Okay. According to the transcript of the meeting, they talked about cooperation in the defense sphere, exchanges useful information, military technical cooperation, joint exercises. Undoubtedly, this is another crucial area that strengthens the extremely trusting strategic nature of our relations, so they said, right? Remember, it comes after weeks after Xi Jinping was in Moscow on his first state visit since re-election, where he and Putin vowed to further deepen mutual military trust and sign a joint statement declaring that the friendship between the nations has no limits, right? So let's talk about that. So what we're looking at is this. Russia and China understand what I'm saying very, very well. And that is that the US's plan is for world hegemony, and Russia and China, they're just got to get them out of the way because they're getting too big for their britches. So now Russia understands that what they got to do is what they got to do. I think what we're going to see on because there can be no negotiated settlement, because listen what the US has said. Here's the plan. Let's make Russia an offer where they demilitarize Crimea and we remilitarize Ukraine. Well, they wouldn't have went to war for that, would they? So basically what the neocons are saying is our position is the same. We want to destroy Russia and take it to pieces. And the Russians' position is we'll kill you if necessary. Neocons will kill every one of you if we have to, but that ain't ever going to happen. So now what we're going to look at is the Russians are going to continue doing, knowing that the only thing, the way they can guarantee their security is through force of arms. And they know you can talk about Finland, you can talk about Sweden, you can talk about all this other stuff, but the Russians are like this. We'll deal with all that stuff later, but Ukraine ain't going to be used as a weapon against us. If we get finished, we're going to keep going. There ain't going to be nothing left. And we're going to keep going till we keep going. And at some point, you got to make a decision what you're going to do. At some point, it's going to be obvious that Ukraine's losing. And guess what, neocons in DC, you got to make a decision. Do you enter this war? Do you join it? Are you coming in? If you're coming in, you got to come. But Russia's there. And at that point, here's the thing I truly believe. Russia and China are doing joint military drills. They are, who knows how much technical sharing they're doing, but we do know, I'm pretty sure that, Russia has these exceptional Kinzhal missiles and these exceptional hypersonic missiles, and China has some good missiles, but no one has anything compared on the level of the missiles that Russia has, their hypersonic missiles. So I'm sure China's asking, saying, look, we need these Kinzhals, brother. We need these. We need these. And whether or not Russia's giving them with them, I don't know. I doubt it. But bottom line is this. I think that China knows this. And that ain't something that I see. This is not something I see as a possibility, but I'm just going to say this. If China thought Russia was going to lose, China would surely join on Russia's side. They would come in on Russia's side. If the U.S. went to war with Russia, I think China would have to enter the war. Maybe not overnight, but it wouldn't be long. I think they had no choice, because what China would know would be, well, they would watch and they would help Russia as best they could. But I do think if things started going bad, China would have to join in, because here's what China knows. Russia, the idiots have made it clear in DC. Our plan is to go after Russia, to take Russia out, to balkanize Russia, take all Russia's natural resources, and then we'll be stronger to go after China. Well, China knows that, so they're not going to sit around and let you do that. So they're watching, and The idea that China is going to hand Russia military. Well, China doesn't need. I mean, excuse me. Russia doesn't need military help from China. What Russia needs from China is what it's getting, and that's economic help. Then, basically, in a nutshell, you've cut off some of Russia's um, customers. And all what Russia needs is customers. Well, China's a big, big, big man on campus, and they got a whole lot of money, and they need stuff. Luckily for the two of them, it works out well because Russia needs to sell stuff to survive, and the U.S. has done everything they can to try to cut off the customers of Russia. Meanwhile, China's a big customer, and China can keep buying from Russia, and they can help keep them afloat. So as long as Russia has customers, it has stuff to sell. If you're selling stuff, as long as you have customers, you're good. And China is ensuring that Russia has customers to a level they need to make it through this and to be strong. So is China in the war? In a way, China's in this full spectrum war in that they know their job is to provide a customer base to Russia. And because they have so much industry, and they do actually need what Russia has, they can just tell other people, look, we ain't buying it from you right now. We're buying everything that Russia has, that we can, everything that Russia has that we can use, we're buying. And they're also buying some energy from Russia. They're reprocessing it and they're selling it to the idiots in Europe, which is fine with the US because it impoverishes Europe. And that's part of the US's plan, is to impoverish Europe. But one of the points I'm making here is that some of these people that come on and they have a discussion about a negotiated settlement, they're missing the mark, because you can't have a negotiated settlement when one side their aim is to kill the other side. Right? Russia's aim is to secure their security along their border. The neocons' aim is to destroy Russia and take it and all of its natural resources. Okay, Russia can achieve its goal, no problem. It has the ability to achieve its goal, and the US will still be fine. The US can't achieve its goal, and Russia or China will still be fine. So Russia and China both cannot allow. But in the same way, China knows they're next. In the same way that there's no way Russia as a nation survives if the US achieves its goals, so Russia's not going to do it. And might I add, which means that if the neocons in DC were to achieve their goal and to threaten the very existence of Russia, Russia has made it clear they'd attack with nuclear weapons. So the bottom line is the neocons are pursuing a suicidal goal. That's why I call them, they're a suicidal cult. They're pursuing a goal that if they were to actually achieve the goal they're pursuing, it would cost all of them their lives instantly and everybody else on Earth. So that's what you're dealing with. People whose goal is, self-annihilation. But the Russians' goal is achievable. The Europeans' goal, technically, if you get away from the European leadership and look at the European people, their goal actually aligns with Russia's goal because they want a secure border. They want security. They don't want war. They want a strong economy. Russia wants the same thing. And basically, you've got Russia and the people of Europe would be perfectly happy with a good, strong economic bond, and everything was going along fine. And then in comes the US and the quisling leaders of the EU to say, look, guys, this ain't working out for us. So we got to screw it all up. And that's going to allow us to destroy Russia. And well, it ain't. It ain't. So now we're looking at a spot where the US neocons' worst nightmare has come to being. And that is that there are a number of things going on here. There's a worst nightmare. First of all, that Russia can't lose this war. And when I say can't lose this war, I don't just mean they can't lose this war in that they have to win, they must win. But at this point, I'm seeing it from the perspective of physically, Ukraine is not in a position where there's any chance that Ukraine could win this thing, which again would result in the death of all of us. So let's be glad they can't. But the bottom line is they no way. There's no avenue for victory now. Ukraine is holding on. They're running out of stuff, and the Russians are very wisely using time as their most valuable asset. The discussion, I'll just say this while we're on here. There's been lots of big discussions about a Ukrainian offensive in the spring. And that seems to be fizzling out. Now, we never know, we are hearing so much about these leaks and things, and what we're hearing is a lot of negative things about the offensive, like they don't have the people they need, they don't have the weapons they need, they can't hold out much longer. Now there is a possibility that that's all propaganda and that they're loaded to they're loaded down, they're armed to the teeth, and they're ready to attack the Russians with a giant offensive. That's possible. And even if that's so, the Russians have been digging in for a long time. So even if they are best case scenario, armed to the teeth, and they got all the people they need, they're going right into the teeth of a giant army that's dug in. Man, the losses are not going to be pretty. But what we're seeing, if we are to believe the Pentagon leaks, if we are to believe some of the alternative media and some of the other things we're seeing, then it certainly appears, if you're to believe the Pentagon leaks, then the Ukrainians do not have the weapons they need. They do not have the ammunition they need. They do not have the people they need. And they ain't got time, because they ain't got much longer that they're going to be able to use to be, what's the term, effective against the Russians. So it's almost like they've got to do this offensive. The problem is this. What happens if they're lining up for the offensive and the Russians decide to do theirs? What happens if they're lining up for the offensive and they get creamed and everybody says, wow, the Russians are going for the Dnieper, and they don't. They just keep on doing what they're doing along the contact line. They just keep on dragging this thing out, because from the perspective of Russia and China, to this, you always want to win a war. But from my perspective of Russia and China, I still see, even if it's unintentional, time is so valuable to them to keep the U.S. bogged down in this thing, to keep the enmity that's growing between the U.S. and the EU. Man, the EU's getting upset that now they're starting to really get a taste of what a pain in the ass this stuff is. And they're like, man, we don't want you to drag us into this again with China too. So from the perspective of China and Russia, I think, I'm not saying they're dragging this war out. I'm not saying anything's intentional, but I'm saying it sure benefits them. Even if they're not trying to do, Russia and China are not trying to drag it out, it benefits them greatly to drag it out. Because what happens, think about this, there's another, there's a potential ending to this war. Here's a potential ending. Ukraine just runs out of stuff. What happens if, as we're reading, they are running short of stuff and the Russians just keep fighting them? And they just kind of really, really start to run out of stuff, and they're unable to successfully defend themselves. First of all, and again, NATO doesn't have what they need to jump in it anyway. But I mean, at this point, what happens at a point when you start seeing Ukrainian divisions, battalions, whatever you want to call it, have to surrender because they don't have anything to shoot back with? So I think they are arming up, they're gearing up everything for an offensive. I think the people who are pushing for this offensive are civilians. I think it's the Blinkens, it's the Bidens, it's the Sullivans, it's the Newlands, it's the people who know nothing about warfare saying, you got to do this, because it's a political thing to them. Hey, man, we promised we were going to do this political PR move, and we got to do this PR move and spread, come on, let's get these guys out here. Let's get running into these machine gun nests. Man, what happens if it is the massacre that a lot of us think it's going to be? What happens if they get this thing going and they charge and it is an unthinkable massacre? The potential is for a massacre of, like, biblical terms. Don't know if it's going to happen. Who knows? The Ukrainians may get some ground, they may not, but man, I fear the worst for them. And one of the things that seems to me going on, and maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, here's an example of why, just some suspicions of mine about how this thing's going. Look, the Russians create these, as they call them, kettles, right? Or, cauldrons, where they surround troops and then boom, okay. Bakhmut, the Russians have surrounded Bakhmut nearly, but one of the interesting things is there was this little alleyway that's been left where Ukrainians can come and go. Now, one possibility is the fighting's too hard and Russia can't close that up, so they can't close the cauldron, as it were. The other one is that they want it open. You could make an argument that the Russians don't want the fall of Bakhmut, that they were like, look, let's drag this Bakhmut thing out as long as we could. That they're like, look, as long as we're dragging this out, we're killing Ukrainian soldiers. So we're destroying Ukrainian equipment. If we just take Bakhmut and it falls tomorrow, whatever soldiers' equipment they got, run. And then we got to chase people or whatever. But as long as they want to fight for Bakhmut, they're going to keep losing people. They're going to keep losing equipment. We'll leave just enough. And I would imagine if I'm in charge of the Russian military in that area, here's what I'm going to say. The soldiers that try to leave Bakhmut, I want you to attack them. I want you to hit them with artillery and with everything you got. I want heavy losses for those who leave. If you see them coming in and bringing in equipment, yeah, let them in. Let them in. Open the door. It's like a roach motel. Is that we used to have an advertisement in the U.S. A roach motel. Roaches come in, but they can't go, but they don't ever leave. That's what Bakhmut would be. If I were in charge of this thing, I'd let them know. Keep this alleyway open right here. Let's not close this. And soldiers coming in, do not fire on those guys. Let them go. Soldiers going out, I want you to be merciless and tear them to shreds. That way, you're just feeding this thing and you can keep attacking. And who cares how long it goes on, because they'll run out of soldiers in Bakhmut if nowhere else. And anywhere that you have a cauldron going on where you're starting to surround them, always leave an alleyway and always allow them to continue to send people in there. And just so that you can wipe it out. And I suspect that's kind of what's going on here. Maybe I'm wrong. That's what I do. And I wouldn't be in a rush to end this thing if I were the Russians, because to end it, of course, as I said, who are you going to end it with? The neocons? That ain't happening. But if I'm the Russians, the longer it goes on, the more I watch Europe weaken. And that's a big part of it. Europe weakens. The more and let me add this. If I can drag this thing out, that also gives me a chance to fight on some of the other, throughout the other spectrum, right? So what's happening? The Russians and Chinese are aligning more. So the Russian Chinese they're aligning in a way that basically, and this is what I hear from the Chinese, we don't want to fight, but we will if we have to. So I think you've got the Russians and the Chinese coming together saying, we don't want to fight, but we will if we have to. And we are preparing. And you know who they're preparing to fight if they must fight. And if they must fight, because they know, look, the U.S.'s plan would be to go to war with China and then say, we're going to block off Chinese ships so they can't go places and sell things and all. Well, at that point, for instance, Russia would say, hey, look, some of the Chinese ships are coming to sell us stuff. We're not going to let you block them off. I mean, think about this. If the U.S.'s plan, which always has been, is to surround China, to block China off, and to lay siege to China, so China's ships can't go back and forth, they can't sell stuff, they can't bring in raw materials. You know what the Russians are going to do? They're going to say, our ships are going to China and they're coming from China. And if you try to stop our ships, then it's war with us. See, that's what they do. They're doing a lot of heavy dealing with China. So if the U.S. starts tangling it up with China, Russia can just say, look, we're dealing with China. We got ships full of fuel and gas and all that. They're going to China and they're coming back from China empty. And you ain't going to stop them, U.S. And you're already tangling with China. If you try to stop our ships, then our subs are going to be sinking your ships in your sea lanes. At that point, now you've got the U.S. against China and against Russia. They can't. There's no win there. I don't think there's a win against China in the South China Sea anyway, in that area of the world. But then, of course, the U.S. would be like, we're going to blockade you guys. There goes Russia saying, we've got ships going back and forth between us. If you touch one of those ships, it's me and you. And the U.S. is tangling, possibly going to war with Russia and China, a war that it knows it can't, that our military knows they can't win. And of course, the Europeans are not feeling this. They're not like they want to be pulled into this. And imagine this. Imagine if old Joe Biden in the United States, this hated bastard, and Victoria Nuland suddenly said, we're at war and we're drafting people. Man, they tear this country apart. The people that hate Biden, the number of people who oppose that and say, you mean you want my kids to go die for these maggots? It would tear this country apart. I don't see how the United States could mobilize for a war, as hated as its leadership is by the people in this country. I don't see how countries, think about the EU. Think about France. Think about France. Already, we're going to war with Russia. Time to mobilize. The people are already mobilized. They're in the streets burning the damn place down. So how are you going to mobilize? Meanwhile, if Russia feels threatened and the U.S. is coming after them, if China feels threatened, their people are patriotic and they're ready to fight to defend their countries. So it ain't going to be so easy for the U.S. and the EU to drag their citizens and immobilize them to go to war with Russia and China. And the people of Russia and China will defend their countries if necessary. So that's a mess, as it were. But I just think the longer this goes on, the more obvious it becomes to the European leaders that they can't hold on, and they're going to try as best they can, but it'll get more obvious. And then I think what you're going to see in Europe and the Russians, that the U.S. has created what they didn't want. They wanted the Europeans to be vassals, but now we hear Macron saying we don't want to be vassals, and other people saying we don't want to be vassals. What they mean is, and I've said this before, they don't mean we want independence for Spain and France and the UK and Denmark and Holland and Austria. That is not what the leaders of the EU means. What they mean is we want the EU, this unelected body, to be in charge of all of these countries. We just don't want the EU to be under the US anymore, or NATO to be under the US anymore. We want it to be independent, and we want the ruling elite of the EU to completely take over the EU and not be answering anymore to the US. Well, that ain't going to happen, because both NATO and the EU are nothing but US projects. All you have to do is look at the people who run it now. Look at Stoltenberg. Look at the people in charge at von der Leyen. That you couldn't be greater neocon US puppets than them. They know their job. So the idea that the EU is going to, that Europeans are going to somehow, that their leaders are somehow going to reset the EU or reset NATO in a way that is European oriented is a fantasy. It's neocon owned. That's what it is. Deal with it. The only thing that can happen would be countries do like the Orban type thing, where country by country, they vote in people, or vote in a government that says no more. We're not going to do what we're told. They can't just come out and say we're not vassals anymore. It's a waste of time. It means nothing. The U.S. neocons will say, sure, yeah, now shut up and do what you're told. What they have to actually do is stop being vassals. Not saying. See, here's the thing about Macron. Macron says we don't want to be vassals anymore. But then he goes and he says, but we got to do what the hell we're told. We don't want to be any vassals anymore. Now let's stand up and what do you want me to do there, Victoria Nuland? Oh yeah, more weapons for Ukraine. People don't want to care what you have to say. They want to watch what you do. So when Macron says we're not sending any more stuff, we're not sending any more money, we're not supporting this anymore. When any of the leaders in Europe start actually acting in a way that shows that they feel difference, yeah. But as long as Macron's bumbling, murmuring, whatever, as long as any of them are mumbling about being vassals, complaining a little bit, saying we ought to do something different, nobody's going to pay any attention until they actually do something different. And right now, what did Macron do? He could care less about the people of France. They're in the streets, and he really doesn't care. He don't work for them. So he's not speaking for them. And he's not even speaking to them, not interested in them. Let them do what they're going to do. He don't care if they burn France down. France means nothing to him. So that's the thing. The more obvious that it gets to the people of Europe that their leaders don't care about them, the more unstable Europe gets socially and politically, and the more likely it becomes that the Europeans, when they get an opportunity, are going to elect some people that that don't want to, or at least make an attempt to elect some people who aren't going to go along with the DC neocon project. That's disaster for the neocons. Their worst thought is a bunch of little Viktor Orban's running around saying that we're concerned about our people. I'm not saying that I'm in favor of Orban or not. The only thing I'm saying, excuse me, I'll keep yawning. Sorry about that, but it's late. The only thing I'm saying is Orban has at least a mind of that says to him, I'd like independence, rather than just a complete and total puppet. He's wants some level of sovereignty. He wants to make decisions that's in the best interest of his people as best he can. And until you see other leaders like that, then, and I think you'll start to see some spring up over time, but it's going to take time before there's elections again. But I think that's what you're going to see spring up. And of course, the Ukraine issue is creating a wonderful dynamic for Russia and China, because now they don't have to say to their people, we have to do these very strange these things that are different and unique. We've got to do some things that we might not have wanted to do. No, they can just do them, because the people are like, look, we understand that we're under siege, and we have to trust our leaders to do what we have to do after they do to protect us. The Russians don't want to go back to the 1990s, and neither do the Chinese, and they ain't going to do it. So what we're seeing now is more and more. When you see like the Chinese, what is it? What is this guy? He is the Chinese, the defense chief, the head of defense, uh, Chinese defense minister, state counselor and defense minister Ling Shai-fu. Right. So when you see this guy here meeting with Putin, when you see Shoigu and these people together and they're meeting for a reason. One reason is to actually talk about the things they need to do militarily to become stronger as a unit. Number two is, I believe this, and this is always important, they're doing that as a message to the world, but particularly as a message to the US, and that is, look, if you're coming after one of us, you always have to wonder, is the other one going to jump in? If you're coming after Russians, you got to wonder, is China going to jump in? If you come after China, you got to wonder. You can't go in there without taking into account that this other guy might start throwing punches at you too. And so you better be very, very wary about attacking Russia or attacking China, because if you do, the odds are getting significantly higher that you'll attack both. And if you're only attacking one, you may have the technological prowess of both that you're facing. But at any rate, this is about sending a message. These pictures are about sending a message. I'm looking at a picture. There's the Chinese defense chief. There's the Russian defense chief, and then there's the president of Russia all together in one picture. That's very telling. That's telling. And I think that what we're seeing is the circumstances. It's the opposite of what the neocons wanted. They wanted to separate the two of them. Now then, they wanted to scare China and all this kind of stuff. And now they've only convinced China that they must become closer with Russia. They've only convinced the both of them that their military ties must become stronger. And I think what we're seeing economically is that these countries from all over the world are saying we want in with those are the people we don't want in on. We want in with Russia and China. We don't want in on the US. Their banks are unstable and they're being run by a bunch of idiots and lunatics. And so it's a disaster for the neocons. It is an absolute disaster. What they've gotten is they're getting is the opposite of what they want. All right, I'm going to take a look and see. We got a few, one or two super chats. Let's go through them. We'll start. Honey Bell, thank you for the super sticker, Honey Bell. And oh my gosh, Jura Malditz. Thanks a lot, Jura. Certainly appreciate that. And there goes Michelle Parks. Thanks for the super sticker, Michelle Parks. Appreciate that. All right, we might have a question. Hold your breath. Rafael Lagunde, a regular here, says, Today Russia announced the weapon to take out and disable satellite is ready to go. The tsunami undersea rocket is ready. Why can't Russia say stop? Well, that is their way of saying stop. That is their way of saying stop. It is letting their enemies know that we have, look, think about this. One of the things that happens in nature, right? If you see a bird, and what happens when they see another bird to scare them? They puff their feathers to make themselves look physically bigger, because they want to say to any potential adversary, look, you're going to have a tough fight. You don't want this fight. It's their way of trying to stop a fight before it starts. Animals do that. They try to look bigger, right? Guys, you'll see guys. There's a bunch of girls around. They try to stick their chest out. There's other big guys around. They try to look tough. Why? Because they want to look scary. They don't want the other guy to try to beat them up or attract the woman or whatever. This is natural. What Russia's doing is to the United States, they're saying, look, we got these weapons. We don't want to use them. Don't make us. It's sensible to me. It's sensible. You show somebody, leave me alone. I got a knife. You're not saying I want to stab you. If I wanted to stab you, I would hide the knife. You know what I mean? I'd hide the blade. I wouldn't let you see the blade. I wouldn't want you to know that I had a weapon. Then I'd attack you, and then I'd stick you with the knife if I wanted to stick you with a knife. But if I want you to leave me alone, I'm going to hold up the knife and say, see this, leave me alone. It is a deterrent. What Russia's doing now is deterrence. When you tell people you have these devastating weapons, those are used to be as deterrents. If you just wanted to use them, you would never say to the US, I've got a way to kill your satellites, because they may be able to prepare. You only tell them you got a way to kill your satellites if you want them not to attack you, and you don't want to have to kill our satellites. Richard Adams says, none of this makes sense to me. I cannot imagine Americans consenting to a draft in this day and age. I agree with you. That's what I'm saying. We're in agreement, Richard. I can't imagine Americans saying, yeah, come on, let's go ahead, draft there, put our kids at war, Joe, and we'll send them out, and Joe Biden will tell them where to go. Yeah, good luck with that. So I'm with you. I'm with you, my friend. We are in a oneness. Oh, we got some more super stuff. Tyro Man Harris, thank you. Next we go to Tamaputra says, Russia is the student of Sun Tzu's art of war. When you surround an army, leave an outlet free. Do not press a desperate foe too hard. Exactly. That's it. That's Sun Tzu. You leave them a way out. And it's perfect, because you let some people come in, and then you don't let anybody come out. You leave them, if they leave, you make them take losses coming out, and you just drag this thing out. I mean, exactly. That's the art of war. And China's trying to fight the art of war, which is what? The best battle you win is the one you win without fighting, right? Sparky, good old Sparkster, drink American owned and brewed Yingling Golden Pilsner. The guy who runs it is old school in the best possible way. There you go. Good old Yingling Golden Pilsner, huh? There we go. Sparky's the spokesman for Yingling. Way to go, Sparky. TNT says China and Russia walk silently, both carry big sticks. That's exactly what they're doing. That's exactly what they're doing. All right, next we got some people over at Rockford. Thanks a lot, Scott Johnson. Scott Johnson has given me a tip. All right, all. Anything else? Oh, Jay says, even if Ukraine could win this war, U.S. hegemony is over. They've shown their hand. Yeah, it's over because here's where's real American hegemony. It's the dollar. It's the dollar. The dollar is what allows the United States to keep borrowing money to build this keep this war machine going. And Russia and China both know the real war is BRICS and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Again, another reason why I say if I'm Russia and China, I'm dragging this thing out as long as I can. Yeah, come in and out of Bakhmut and all the rest of these places. I will let you march soldiers in and out for the next 5 years, because during that time, I'm taking your economic system apart. I am building new currencies. I do not want this to end if I'm them, because I got a new currency that's coming. And I have a funny feeling that when that new currency hits, think about it from the perspective of Cuba, of all the BRICS nations, right, that can buy and sell stuff in this new currency. But what happens when they say to Cuba and Venezuela and Nicaragua and Iran, which is going to be a BRICS nation, right? You can buy and sell everything using these currency, and they sell to anybody in the world. You know what? Venezuela's got a lot of stuff. You can buy it from them. You want to go visit Cuba, do all day long. Here's a card. We got a new currency called as you know, I always say the blurb. You can buy and sell in blurbs. Iran, their oil's on the market, but you got to buy it in blurbs. Everybody's going to go out and get blurbs. They got to do that. So, bottom line is, I think they're kind of dragging this thing out. And when they get the economic wherewithal, I mean, if they can drag this thing, the U.S. is like another year, which I don't think they can. I think this summer it's going to end it. Whenever the Russians decide to do their offensive, if they did, if I was the Russians, I would never do it. Things are working for me. Things ain't working for you. If I'm the Russians, why would I do an offensive? That would end this thing. That ain't what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to slowly chip away. I'm not trying to crush the Ukrainian military and political situation. I'm trying to allow it to collapse of its own merit. I'm trying to get it to the point where it implodes and it falls apart and there's nothing there. Once it implodes, I don't have to take Odessa. There's no army to protect Odessa because the government fell and everything's falling apart. So I don't have to take anything. I can just keep on walking. What happens when they fall apart? So if I'm Russia, the term I've always used is collapse. I'm moving this thing towards an economic, military, and political collapse. Economically, Ukraine has already collapsed. So, and politically, there's nothing but puppets for the U.S. So it's not going well. So as I said, it's a nightmare to me. And of course, the Indians are sitting there, and what the Indians know is that they aspire to be a world power, and they know good and damn well that if Russia falls, then China falls. They're next. Clearly, it's obvious who next would be next, and that is India. Why? Because they have the potential to be a very large economy. They're already a large economy to be a world power. They're growing, and they've got technology and things of that nature. And people in America are looking at them saying, when we get finished with Russia and China, excuse me, we got to put you in your place because you're trying to be independent, and we don't allow independence. So they've got to help Russia, which is what they're doing. So the neocons have created this thing, and there we go. We don't have Russia or China anymore. In a way, we do. We have Russia and China in that they respect each other's individual cultures, their sovereignty, their independence, and the way they run their internal business. Both of them accept that for the others and are all like, we do what you're going to do. We're not involved. But they're not trying to interfere, and they're both trying to grow together and try to protect each other and trying to maintain an alliance that's in the best interest of both of them. And they keep saying it's not against anybody. Well, it's not against the United States, but it's to set up a defense in case the United States, there ain't nobody else, but in case the United States attacks them, they want to be in a position to defend themselves. So I think one of the things that they're meeting about a lot now is how to interoperability between the two sides, and under what circumstances they would attack, when, where, and who. That if the United States pushes into a war with Russia and China, what they would actually do, how they would execute it. So Russia and China are an alliance now. Russia and China are, I think, one entity that's defending themselves together. And the neocons have created this nightmare for themselves. They say what they wanted, but they don't know any other way other than an aggressive, violent, and threatening posture. And that certainly creates alternative blocks of adversaries, alternative blocks of people who feel that they need to defend themselves as a group, as opposed to individually. So you're going to go after 10 people. You're going to threaten all 10 of them and think those 10 people don't talk to each other. You're going to threaten all 10 of them and don't think that at some point they're not going to wise up and say, there's 10 of us and there's one of you. If we join together, there's too many of us for you to beat up. Individually, you can give us a fit. But if we come together, there's too many of us. And that's all that's happening with Russia. They're realizing that, what they already know, if they come together, yeah. Well, I'm seeing what in the world's going on here. All right. Well, thanks a lot, everybody. I think that's it. By the way, I'm back. Like I said, I've been out a week. I was traveling and then, had a lot of stuff going on when I got back. So I missed a lot of time, but I'm going to be doing my regular videos. Additionally, if anything you can do to help the channel, of course, patreon.com, whatever you can do. If you can do $3, $5, $20, $100 a month, whatever you can do on Patreon, it's very much appreciated. My Cash App information is there. Certainly my PayPal information is there, and buy me a coffee is always an option if you can do that. Last but not least, rockfin.com. Make sure you go over there, become a Rockfin member. Rockfin's great. It's like YouTube without the videos and no censorship whatsoever. So you got to become a member on my Rockfin. In case they throw me off of YouTube, then you'll be there to watch on Rockfin. How does Rockfin stay on the air? Last thing I'll say is they do allow subscriptions. If you can be a subscriber on my Rockfin account, I would appreciate that. $14.99 a month. If you sign up for a year, they knock a few months off. It comes down to like 12 bucks and something a month. So if you can afford to be a subscriber, I would certainly appreciate that. If you could subscribe to my channel on Rockfin. If you can't, just become a member and you'll see all of my stuff on Rockfin. It doesn't matter. The only thing that the thing that subscribers get every Wednesday from 9 to 10 a.m. I do a subscriber only show with Scott Ritter, and I certainly appreciate that if you can help the show on Rockfin. Patreon, buy me a coffee, whatever the case may be. Thanks a lot, everybody. Let me make sure I haven't missed any more super chats. Jiao999, thank you very much. And that's it. Thanks a lot, everybody. Peace. I'm out.